Tonight we wanted to talk about Halloween and the flood, since this is October and Halloween is coming up. And I try to, at least occasionally, talk about holidays when they come up, because they're not necessarily important, but it's kind of important that we know a little bit of the history because people make them into things that they're not. So Halloween is a festival of ancient times. A lot of people connect it to druids and witchcraft, which it is. And basically, what happens is, if you go all the way back to like pre-flood and early post-flood times, there are holy days set up by the patriarchs. And we have Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then Shem, Ham, and Japheth have basically Noah's 16 grandsons. And then it just keeps going out. And as they travel out to their individual countries, they become pagan. They get things confused, sometimes on purpose, sometimes accidentally. In the really ancient documents, they all worship one God. And then pretty soon they start worshiping the angels and the ancestors, and everything is a god of some sort, and things get perverted. So, what we've done before is we've looked at the calendar, and we've seen that one of the things that we have in the calendar is the festivals. So you've got like Passover and Pentecost and Tabernacles and those things. The other thing that wasn't known till recently, I mean, it's there in the Old Testament, but when you're not looking for it, you don't see it. And that is the idea of a tekufa. And the concept, like what we've talked about before, uh, the probably the most detailed of this information would be in the book of Jubilees. So when Noah gives the Noahide laws, which are the seven Noahide laws, all Gentile nations are supposed to follow and add to, but not take away from, in an effort to serve God. And then later on, the Jews would come and they would have all of their rituals and all the extra things that the nation of Israel was to do that Gentiles don't. But one of the things instituted by Noah was the festivals of Tekufas, or in other words, at the equinoxes, you've got equinoxes and solstices. So, in other words, the first day of each season basically is set aside as a holiday. And this was before we had a Passover ritual, even a Jewish nation, that kind of thing. But what's interesting about it is that the concept didn't involve rituals. The idea was 4 times a year, your sons and daughters may be, 50 or 100 miles away, and that's just enough that you don't come visit all the time. But 4 times a year, you're supposed to get together and go back over everything, make sure everybody's okay, see what family can do for family, um, see what prophecies, if any, were fulfilled in the last 3 months. Talk about repentance. Do you need to repent of your sins? Focus on the Messiah's coming. And if no prophecies are fulfilled and there's no reason for repentance, the family just gets together and has a good time. Basically, if you compare it to American culture, we have something like Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving, people will take the day off from work and travel maybe hundreds of miles or 1,000 miles or so to go back home and be with family. Or they might do this on Christmas or something like that. But this is the concept given for the Noahide laws. And what's going to happen is different things are memorized. So let's take a look at this. And we'll go, here is our Dead Sea Scroll calendar site. That's just dsscalendar.org. And it's very similar to the um, modern Jewish calendar, except that the modern Jewish calendar goes by new moons. So it's a lunar calendar or lunar solar calendar. The Dead Sea Scrolls teach that the original calendar, it's the same thing. The 14th of the first month, for instance, is Passover, always is, 14th of Nisan. But when does Nisan start? When is the beginning of the year? And so rather than going by a moon phase, the new moon closest to the spring equinox, The Dead Sea Scroll calendar would simply target the equinox, make it a solar calendar, but they would keep the weeks in check. So, in other words, New Year's always starts on a Wednesday, and you just drift back 3 or 4 days. And when you're more than 3 days out, you have a leap week. So you put 7 days back in. Now you're 3 or 4 days ahead, and you allow it to drift back. Much like we do, we have 365 days on our calendar. But once every 4 years, that's enough to add a day. And that's what we do. We just add one day. So we keep it extremely accurate as far as the solstice goes, or the equinox. So the spring equinox is almost always, like 90% of the time, 99% of the time, it is March 20th. So the Wednesday, and we've got videos on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, but basically the Wednesday closest to March 20th is always New Year's on their calendar. So this is important because we want to see how things change. Now, according to Jubilees, um, somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, Jubilees gives the prophecy that somewhere along the line, the Jews would flip out a solar calendar for a lunar calendar. And so they would start going by new moon phases. And this was a perversion or a messing up of the calendar. You're not going to have Yom Kippur on Yom Kippur if you start the year in the wrong place. It's going to be off. And so that's what we see here. Now, here in this one, we've got the Dead Sea Scroll date. So this is the calendar as the Dead Sea Scrolls have it. So today is, let me just run down here. It's Tuesday, and it's already Tuesday in Israeli Standard Time, so IST. It's 2 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. So right now, as I'm doing this live in Kansas Central Time, it's 7:08 p.m. and it's Monday night on the 17th. So tomorrow, of course, is October 18th, 2022. So these are our dates. The Pharisee date for Tuesday is Tishrei 23, 5783. And the Dead Sea Scroll date is Tishrei 28. It's a week out, not quite a week, but almost. And it's 5947. And you can go back and look at some of the YouTube videos we've done. Some of the questions are, why is this 5947 instead of 5783? Where's the 167 years extra coming from? And so we've covered that, but basically there's ancient Jewish texts that actually tell you that because of people accepting Yeshua as the Messiah, they decided a rabbi named Yoshi had changed or wanted to change the prophecy of Daniel. In Daniel 9, it talks about from a decree to rebuild a temple to the Messiah's cutting off is exactly so many days. And he said, no, it means from the destruction of the old temple to the destruction of the new temple. And then he tried to make things fit. And of course, that doesn't work, but he was rejected. He came up with a second idea, which was rejected. But somewhere along the line, about 200 years later, a version of Yoshi's calendar was adopted. And that's how we go from 5947, which is what the Dead Sea Scroll calendar has, to 5783. And so you might look at this funny, but most of us as Christians expect the Messiah to come back at any time, the rapture to happen at any time. And if you think about it, if the second coming is around the year 6000, which it's supposed to be, something like that, the year 6000, according to the modern Jewish calendar, is over 200 years away. And I think most of us are thinking, yeah, that sounds a little too far out. And according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, it's 52 and a half years away. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's when the second coming is, but the year 6000. So in other words, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar has it quite a bit closer than the modern Jewish calendar. So anyway, looking at these things, this is basically how it works. And on this site, we have a lot of studies on how the Dead Sea Scrolls work. There's explanations here for the onas and the rings and that kind of stuff, and a study on the Enoch calendar, which is a little different. Basically, here you can type in any number between 1900 and 2100 and come up with the year, or just click on the current year. So this is 2022. So here is 2022, which is 59:47 a.m. AM is Anno Monday, from the year of the creation of the world. AD is Anno Domini, from the coming of our Lord. And so this dates from Jesus' birth. This dates from the creation of the world. And they may or may not be, perfectly accurate, but that's what the system is based off. And you can see there's a Tekufa, which is the observed spring equinox. And then the next day is the actual first day of spring. And then everything goes down. As you can see, Passover is on the 14th. This year it was April 5th. But let me show you something. And again, talking about this, first let's go to, pull this out. This is, let me make it a little bit bigger. So this is Genesis. And as you know, we've done this before, but when you get to Genesis 5, you can calculate the numbers out and get all the way up to from creation to Noah's birth. And then in Genesis 7, you get Noah is 600 years old when the flood occurs. And then in chapter 10 of Genesis, you get the dates from the flood, Shem, Arphaxad, and all the way down to Abraham. So basic chronology on this. But what I want to show you in here, in addition to that, there's a comment. And so when we get down here to, I believe it's, yeah, this one here, Genesis 7:11. So it's telling us exactly when the flood occurred. Now the flood occurred in the 600th year of Noah's life, which we understand that's 1656 on the AM calendar. So it was 1,656 years after Adam was created. Okay, so as far as human history goes. So, but not only the year, but it gives us the month and the day. It says in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, that's the day all the fountains of the deep were opened, the windows of heaven were opened up, and rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So the flood actually started, the day that it started was the 17th of the second month in the year of Noah's life, the year, his 600th year. So if we put this on our regular calendar, what we're going to see is, let's just start here. It was 1656. And the first month from the spring equinox, which is how the old ones dated it, would be Nisan is the first month. The second month is Iyar. And the 17th would have been that. So here's the 17th. And you'll notice that the way that it works, this is actually mid-spring. So it wasn't on the spring equinox, but it's mid-spring, halfway between spring and summer, the exact middle, the 45th day of the 90 days. And this year that happened to be May 8th, as the anniversary to it, but that's the 17th of ER, so it's mid-spring. So, but what I want you to see on this is one whole month and then 17 days into the second month. So it was 1 month, 17 days, or the 17th of the second month is another way of saying it. So what's going to happen is, in time, everybody uses this ancient calendar, which is a solar calendar based on the spring equinox as the starting for the year. That's consistent for Jews too, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, what happens is later on in time, they change the calendar. They go to a lunar one. But one of the other things that the modern Jewish calendar does that this one doesn't is they change the start date. So New Year's is not the first of Nisan, but it becomes the first of Tishrei. And you'll see that we just not too long ago had the normal Jewish New Year's. So if we go down to what would be considered the 7th month, Tishrei, it's the trumpets, or Yom Torah. And so we've had the Tekufa Tishrei, the Tekufa, or the fall equinox, as it is on this calendar. Then the first day of Fall would be September 21st, was this time anyway, this year. And it's the fall day of remembrance. It's also the festival of trumpets. And then on the 10th, of course, of Tishrei is Yom Kippur. And then on the 15th starts Tabernacles, and we have Tabernacles through that. Now today, of course, is 17th. Again, if I'm doing this on Monday, it's the 17th of October. So it's this one right here. So what I want you to see, we'll come right back to this. But now, if the date of the flood, let's just kind of stop and go back through this again. If the date of the flood is the 17th of the second month, that's ER 17, which is mid-spring. That's when it actually happened. Now, when they switch calendars and they go to a lunar calendar and they flip New Year's exactly 6 months over, things get a little mixed up. For the past 2,000 years, Christianity and Judaism has assumed that the lunar calendar is the correct one and went with that, New Year's being Tishrei. Even though in the Talmud, it'll say that Tishrei is New Year's, the observed New Year's, but they have a ritual where I think it's like once every 20 some years, they have a ritual where they identify and commemorate the calendar and New Year's and creation, that kind of thing. And it's always based on the first of Nisan, or actually a calculation on the spring equinox. So it's interesting, even though they say it's this way, there's ancient evidence that the calendar's been changed. That's a whole other story. But let me show you one other thing. Now, this is our Essene calendar, the way that they have it, the way the wheels work. And we've talked about this a little bit before, but basically it's the year 5947, and it's Tishrei 28. Again, we're using this as Israeli Standard Time, so it's already Tuesday morning. Okay, so it's Tuesday, 2 in the morning. Let me refresh this. I think it did refresh. Okay, yeah, so it did. If it does blink on you, it's just once every minute it refreshes. So anyway, it's Tuesday. It's 2:18 in the morning, Israeli Standard Time. It's October 18th, and it's the year 2022, which up here it's the AM year 5947, Tishrei 28. And this is the actual Dead Sea Scroll calendar way that they do it. All of time is made up of ages. Ages are 2,000 years apiece. Each age is made up of 4 unas, or 500-year pieces. So each 500-year piece is made up of 10 jubilees. A jubilee is 50 years. And each jubilee is made up of 7 shmitas, or 7 weeks of years, as we refer to it in Daniel. So just like we have a decade as 10 years, 10 decades is a century. They have a 7-year period called a shmita. A shmita, 7 of those is 49 years, and then you have an additional year called a jubilee year. And so 2 jubilees equals a century, not 98 years. And the confusion on that came from a couple of different things, like the Ethiopic version of jubilees, for instance, seems to indicate a 49-year cycle. The Hebrew version in the Dead Sea Scrolls, though, teaches a different story. So anyway, as you can see with this, so it's got years, shmitas, jubilees, unas, and ages. So Y, S, J, O, and A. So the year 5947, which is the year 2022 AD, is the 5th year of the 7th Shemitah of the 9th Jubilee of the 12th Ona of the 3rd age. So it's just a different way of saying the calendar. But what I want you to see then with this is the year. This outer ring is the year. And you can see Nisan and ER, Sivan, Tammuz, and on down. So this particular thing right here, this is the spring equinox. So this is the dividing line. So this right here, if you can see this, is day 1. This is Nisan 1. And of course, it's on a Wednesday. And this is Saturday to Sunday. So this is a Wednesday here. So you'll go down through here and you hit the 14th of Nisan. That'd be Passover. And Passover has an unleavened bread, of course, is that week. And and then we go on out to here. And we get to here. This is the last day of Nisan. Each month is 30 days. So this is the first of ER. And if you go down here and you count through 17 of these, you come to this. This is the 17th of ER, or the middle part of that. So this is the first, or this is the spring equinox. Okay, so this is mid-spring, and this is the summer solstice, and this is midsummer, and this is the fall equinox, and this is the mid-fall. And this is, it's got tabernacles in here, but this one right here is first day of winter, so it's the winter solstice, and this is midwinter, and then we come back, it's been a full year now, this is the spring equinox. So I want you to see this. If this is the spring equinox, this is the first of the year, and the flood occurred on the 17th of ER, so it's 17th of the second month, that runs us over to here. It's actually mid-spring, so exactly halfway between spring and summer. Okay, so this is the actual date on when the flood occurred. But now you're going to flip the calendar for the last 2,000 years and say that New Year's is in Tishrei, not in Nisan. And of course, it's a lunar calendar, so it varies and stuff. But it's interesting how things in paganism builds on from other things. So if we flip this around, we go exactly from here straight across the board to here. So this is Tishrei. So if this was New Year's, because we went from this to this, we flipped it exactly 6 months. So instead of starting at the spring equinox, we're starting at the fall equinox. If that's the case, then the 17th of the second month from here is right here. So it's mid-fall. So the other interesting thing about this is you get away from a solar calendar and you go to a lunar calendar. So what happens is if each one of these months starts on a new moon, the middle of the month would be a full moon. So this here, if you're doing it through a lunar calendar, modern Jewish, is the full moon of October. Okay. And so basically what we're showing here is, and this is how most of the pagans do things. If you know anything about Wicca, witchcraft, some of the old pagan religions, the mid-fall festival is what they call Samhain or Halloween. And it's a major thing, not the beginning and endings of the seasons, but the mid-seasons. And so if you're doing it, they would always go on a full moon. So it's interesting. A lot of people would say, well, maybe I went out to see if there's any Wiccans or Druids or whatever doing a ritual on Halloween. Sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. Well, they would be out there doing their stuff on a full moon because that's the kind of calendar that they use. So just because we go out on a October 31st, that doesn't mean anything. On our Gregorian calendar, that would be mid-fall. And in the Catholic Church, not October 31st, but the 1st of November is All Souls Day. So again, kind of commemorating that. Now, All Souls Day is a Catholic remembrance of the martyrs. So once you get more than 365 martyrs, you can't have a day for each martyr. So basically they picked All Souls Day, the first of fall, to commemorate the martyrs. And you can kind of understand this. If anciently this is a memory of the flood, and the flood was the earth being destroyed, and the earth was destroyed because of the evil, the corruption, the Nephilim, the witchcraft, the anti-God, to the point that everything was messed up, much worse than it is now. And God had to wipe everything out and start over. So if that's the case, you could commemorate, and this was done in the early times, commemorate the date of the flood as I told you so. So when this comes around, we could, in the spring, really anciently, we used to say, okay, it was exactly so many years today that the flood occurred. It was a real event, and it shows us that God will not tolerate sin forever. When we get in First Peter is talking about the fact that God will come back and destroy the earth with fire. And he's saying that some people, the scoffers, don't believe it would really happen. And the whole concept is Peter would say, you should just be able to go back and say, well, if the world was destroyed by a flood, and that was literal, and the same set of prophecies, and he's referring to Adam's ancient prophecy in Adam's testament, that the world would be destroyed once by fire and once by flood. So if that prophecy was correct and the world was destroyed by a flood, then the other prophecy is correct and the world will be destroyed by fire. It's really simple. One would prove the other. But in First Peter, he basically says that's what you should say to them. But their answer is basically, well, I don't really believe the flood occurred either. So the scoffers, they don't believe in anything. So anyway, but that's the whole point. You commemorate this. So what happens is this is flipped now because 2,000 years ago, the calendar's flipped. So the commemoration for the flood goes from mid-spring to mid-fall. And it goes from the 17th of Iyar to the 17th of Heshvan. And now instead of being an exact, it was a Sunday. So it would always be a Sunday on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. But now it's a lunar calendar, so it all depends whenever the full moon is. And so that becomes known as All Souls Day, Halloween, etc. And of course, Druids and pagans and Wiccans and stuff like that make it worse and worse and worse. I think it's interesting if you think about it, if you've ever studied witchcraft, for instance, just what they refer to the festivals as. So there are major festivals for them, which are the mid seasons, and minor festivals, which are the actual solstices and equinoxes. So on a pagan calendar, there's 8 holidays or holy days. Okay. And basically just like the ones, and they got it from the patriarchs. I mean, the original calendar, except they would say the mid seasons are more important than the seasonal changes. So what's interesting on this, though, the minor ones are called esbats, okay, and the major ones, like Halloween, are called sabbats. And that's one more of these evidences. How would a pagan that knows absolutely nothing about Judaism or has nothing to do with it because they evolved independently or whatever, why would they take their high holy days and call them Sabbaths if there's no connection to the ancient calendar and the ancient way of doing things? Just kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot more coincidences along those lines. But I just wanted to share this with you so you can kind of see how anciently we have a flood, and anciently we used a lunar calendar or a solar calendar, and the flood was on the mid-spring, 17th of Iyar, second month, 17th of the second month in the year 1656 from creation. And then 2,000 years ago, when we flipped to a lunar calendar and flipped the New Year's from the spring to the fall, the 17th of the second month becomes the full moon of October, which is Halloween. And it's interesting because Halloween then becomes a major, probably the major celebration from all the pagans. And to me, it's interesting. Number one, if there was no flood, why would there be a Halloween? Or flip that around. If there's a Halloween, there must have been a reason to something it commemorates, and not just the fall, because we could do this in the winter or the spring or the summer. So what's so big about the fall, for instance? So the fact that we have a Halloween is proof that there really was a flood. So I just want you to think about that a little bit. So, but the pagans, of course, are kind of flipping the whole concept. We would say that the entire world was destroyed by a flood, mainly because of the extreme corruption, paganism, which is basically we're saying Nephilim. Okay, the Nephilim, genetic tampering, the false religious system, all the corruption from the pre-flood world. And there's actually a good amount of evidence, not evidence, I mean, a good amount of history that still exists on the pre-flood world. So we don't know everything, and it's still kind of piecing together, but there's a good amount of it. From the Nephilim Wars to the different experiments they did. A lot of the stuff is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, mentioned by church fathers and a few other things. So, but we would say that's bad. We don't want to change our genetics. Anything that changes our genetics is akin to Nephilim technology, and God said no. And so that's why a lot of us won't have anything to do with any kind of genetic experiments, which until, I don't know, 60s or 70s, something like that, we didn't even realize there was anything like a DNA. It hasn't been that long that we have figured out that there's a DNA code. And if you crossbreed or use test tube technology or whatever, try to mix species together, you get cross species. And, apparently, according to history, it can be done. So this is something that's bad, something that we wouldn't put up with, we wouldn't have anything to do with. But now the pagans, on the other hand, flip this around and talk about Zeus and Hera and Hercules being sons of the gods or demigods or half god, half this. And it all goes back to an ancient memory of the Nephilim. And Josephus tells you this. The stories of Zeus and the stories of Neptune were based on Nephilim history, not myth, history. Very garbled history, but history nonetheless. So this is interesting for us. So the pagans then take it, and this is the same thing we have with almost every holiday. When a pan-Babylonian comes along and says, you as a Christian can't celebrate a holiday because the holiday is pagan, it probably is somewhere along the line. But where did the pagans get their ideas from? And it's usually some sort of perversion involving animal or human sacrifice, some sort of fornication, some sort of, other rituals or demonic type stuff. But if you remove that, the only things that are left are historical dates. And they got their historical dates from something. So if you go back far enough, you'll find that almost all of these holidays have something to do with history, something that we probably ought to know about, and not allow pagans to take these things away. So that's basically our study on this. I just wanted to share that with you. So to kind of pull this together again, the flood occurred in 1656, 1656 years from Adam's creation, on the, up to that New Year's, which is the spring equinox, and then the 17th of the second month, 17th of ER, that's the actual date of the flood. But because the calendars flipped exactly 6 months and went from solar to lunar, we now have a commemoration of the ancient memory of the flood, the Day of the Dead, the day of all the ghouls, the people that loved evil and God destroyed and are still somewhere, basically in hell, and all this kind of stuff. And that becomes ingrained in paganism. And then some of those pagan ideas become ingrained in the church. But the basic commemoration of the date, even though it's on the wrong calendar system, goes back and shows us that the Bible is true. I always think it's interesting, and I've mentioned this before, but I always think it's amazing when someone says, well, I don't believe in the flood, I don't believe in a prophecy, I'm not a Christian or whatever. So I think it's all just made up. Excuse me, I got to go to Walmart and buy some costumes for my kids. We're going to go trick-or-treating later. Bye. Then they go on out. I always think that's almost laughable. You don't believe in a flood, but you're celebrating Halloween. Why are you celebrating Halloween? Well, we've always done it. And how far back does it go? Way back when, what did it commemorate? The thing you don't believe in. So it's the same kind of stuff. I don't believe in Jesus being born, but I got to go buy Christmas presents. Why do we have a Christmas? To celebrate the birth of Christ. Yeah, but I don't do that part. I just do the presents part. Okay, but there's a a group of people that want to make money and sell presents, and they do it on Christmas because of a historical memory of something. And so all these things point to it. So yeah, there could be pagan pieces of Halloween. There can be pagan pieces of Christmas. There could be pagan pieces of everything. But even if there are, if we remove the fornication, the drunkenness, the demonic stuff, the paganism, the human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, all the weird stuff that pagans do, remove all that, what will be left? It will be an ancient memory of something. So that's why I try to do these things close to the holidays, just to make you remember things, because it really does help when you have people that are pan-Babylonian or Hebrew roots or trying to say you should or should not observe this because it's all pagan. They have a little bit of knowledge that's dangerous. So they've started with the present time and went halfway back in time and found out something is pagan. Then what they need to do is go all the way back and find out where the pagans got it and what it was before the pagans ruined it. We don't want to do anything pagan. And the Avodah Zarah, which is a Jewish work on what is and is not pagan, I think fits the bill perfectly, how it describes what we should and should not do. And I believe Paul quotes from it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, because he talks about the things that you should do in the stores that you go to. So anyway, we'll stop there. But this is just a kind of brief remembrance of the flood. And I'm not saying that you should or should not practice Halloween or that you should or should not do trick or treating. Some people ignore it completely. Some people pass out tracts on Halloween, do different things. Do what the Lord's guiding you to do. Be careful, but be empowered with knowledge. So um, when I first mentioned to my wife that Halloween is a memory of the flood, she thought she didn't like to decorate for Halloween, but she thought it might be interesting to get one of these the blow up stuff that you have for the Halloween decorations and the Christmas decorations and all that, just the blow up things. But get one that's a big boat and some animals, so it's Noah's Ark. And it would make people ask, it's like, why do you have Noah's Ark? It would be obvious, but why do you have Noah's Ark on as a Halloween decoration? Well, let me tell you the story. So it might be something to do. At least be aware of it so that you can mention it to people. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop there. Hope this was an interesting study. Again, just lots of interesting things when you look at the calendar, all the different things that you can see. But basically, we don't want to do anything that's pagan. We do want to remember that the calendars were flipped. And basically, long story short, Halloween is an ancient memory of the Day of the Dead, of the flood. The fact that we have a Halloween and people celebrate it proves that there was a flood. It's just one of those things. And so we need to go back, just like people celebrate Christmas and they don't believe in it, but it's an ancient memory of the birth of the Messiah. If it hadn't have happened, there would be no Christmas. So those kind of things. And the pagans will mix things up and make it Mithras and whatever, but there's some sort of a ancient memory of a historical event there, or that wouldn't exist. So very interesting to look at these things. I'll go ahead and say good night, and we'll see you guys next week. God bless.